In the same season, 7 months apart, San Antonio's head coach suffered a stroke minutes before tip-off, and the franchise's 21-year-old superstar was told he had a blood clot serious enough to end his year on the spot. No coach on the bench, no franchise player on the floor. The record that season, 34 wins, 48 losses, no playoffs. 16 months later, that same organization was standing in the NBA Finals, leading in every single game they played. This is how that happened, and why the roster it produced might already be the best-built starting five in basketball, even without a ring to prove it yet. Start with November 2nd, 2024. Greg Popovich is 75 years old, sitting courtside at the Frost Bank Center, about to coach his 29th straight season for the same franchise. A run no coach in any major American sport had matched with one team. 29 years is longer than some of his own players had been alive. He'd already won 5 championships with 3 different core rosters, reinvented his own offense twice, and turned a small-market franchise most people couldn't find on a map into the most respected organization in the sport. Minutes before the Spurs take the floor against Minnesota, he suffers a stroke. 5 championships, the most wins in NBA history, and on an ordinary Saturday night, all of it is suddenly gone from the sideline, with no warning. Mitch Johnson, a 38-year-old assistant with 0 games of head coaching experience, takes over, not by promotion, by emergency. Nobody hands a first-time coach the reins of an NBA franchise under stranger circumstances than that. He holds the group together as best a first-year coach can mid-season, but San Antonio drifts through the winter without much direction, a talented young roster with nobody steering it who'd ever steered anything at this level before. Wins come in bunches, then disappear in bunches. The record climbs to 500, then falls back below it. It's the basketball equivalent of a team learning to walk again in front of a sold-out crowd every single night. Then it gets worse. Victor Wembanyama had just made his first All-Star team, 21 years old, already the best rim protector in basketball, a 7'4" unicorn who could switch onto a point guard on one possession and block a dunk at the rim on the next. Days after that weekend, he tells the training staff his arm doesn't feel right. Not sore, not tired, wrong, in a way he couldn't quite describe. The tests come back with deep vein thrombosis, a blood clot in his shoulder, and doctors shut him down for the rest of the season immediately. Not a sprain, a real medical emergency, with no promise of exactly when or how he'd come back the same. That same month, in the middle of both disasters, San Antonio makes a move almost nobody was expecting. A 3-team trade sends De'Aaron Fox from Sacramento to San Antonio, an 8-year veteran, a career 21.5-point scorer, arriving at what looked like the lowest point of the Spurs' entire season. On paper, it looked reckless, trading for a max-level guard in the same month your franchise center goes down with a blood clot, and your legendary coach has just had a stroke. But the front office saw something the record didn't show yet. A roster that was still competitive despite everything, that just needed one more player who already knew how to win. In his first 17 games in silver and black, Fox averages 19.7 points and 6.8 assists a night, before a torn tendon in his own finger requires surgery and ends his year too. Even the reinforcement gets hurt. 3 central figures, a coach, a franchise center, and a franchise-altering trade acquisition, all sidelined inside of 4 months. By the time that season closes, the record reads 34-48, no playoffs. But look at what that number is actually hiding. A team that lost its coach to a stroke in November and its franchise center to a blood clot in February still found a way to stay competitive enough to nearly sniff a play-in spot, on the strength of a locker room that, by every account, simply refused to fall apart. Popovich wanted to come back. He really did. He spent the spring rehabbing, working with the same discipline he'd demanded from every player he'd ever coached, and for a while it looked possible. But by that spring, he decided the physical grind of an NBA sideline, the travel, the back-to-backs, the sheer physical toll of 82 nights a year plus playoffs, wasn't something his recovery could handle, and on May 2nd, 29 years after he first took the job, he officially stepped down as head coach. 3 days later, at the press conference introducing Mitch Johnson as the permanent hire, Popovich unzipped his jacket to reveal a t-shirt underneath that read El Jefe, Spanish for the boss, and made it unmistakably clear he wasn't leaving the building, just changing seats, into a new role running the front office. "I'm no longer coach," he told the room. "I'm El Jefe." Johnson wasn't some outside name brought in to clean house. He'd spent nearly a decade climbing the organization's own ladder, coaching the team's G League affiliate to a championship, working as an assistant under Popovich himself for years before any of this happened. He'd absorbed the same defensive principles, the same emphasis on ball movement and selflessness, the same insistence that no player, no matter how talented, was bigger than the group. Now he had the job for real, with a legendary shadow to coach under and a fan base quietly wondering whether this rebuild even had a plan left in it. That August, the Spurs answered the biggest lingering question by locking Fox in for the long haul, a 4-year, $229 million extension running through the 2029-30 season. It was a statement as much as a contract, telling Fox and the rest of the league that San Antonio saw him as a foundational piece and not a rental. A month later, with the number 2 overall pick in that year's draft, they took Dylan Harper out of Rutgers, a 6'6" guard who'd averaged 19 points a game in his only college season. A smooth, patient scorer with a frame that already looked ready for NBA minutes. On paper, a solid complementary piece to slot in next to a healed Wembanyama, a locked-in Fox, and a reigning Rookie of the Year already on the roster in Stephon Castle. Nobody was calling him the missing piece yet, not even close. What actually happened the following season is where this stops sounding like a recovery story and starts sounding like a warning to the rest of the league. San Antonio wins 62 games, up from 34 the year before, good for the second seed in the entire Western Conference. Isolate just the starting 5, Wembanyama, Fox, Castle, Devin Vassell, and Julian Champagnie, and the number gets almost unfair. 21 wins, 3 losses, together, outscoring opponents by 18.5 points per 100 possessions, the second best lineup in the whole NBA that year, trailing only Oklahoma City. And the fit isn't an accident, it's basketball logic. Wembanyama erases the paint on defense, which frees Fox and Castle to gamble and pressure the ball at the point of attack without fear of getting beat backdoor. Vassell and Champagnie space the floor around all of it, so when Wembanyama rolls to the rim or Fox turns the corner, there's nowhere left for a defense to help from. Every piece covers for the piece next to it. That's why Wembanyama wins Defensive Player of the Year unanimously, leads the league in blocks again, and posts career highs across the board at 22 years old. A season that answers, in the loudest way possible, every lingering question about whether the blood clot would change what kind of player he could become. It's why Castle, the reigning Rookie of the Year, doesn't take the usual sophomore step back. He takes a leap, up to 16.7 points and 7.4 assists a night, shooting a cleaner percentage from everywhere on the floor, developing into exactly the kind of two-way guard a franchise builds a decade around. And it's why Julian Champagnie might be the best story on the entire roster, undrafted in 2022. Cut by Philadelphia after appearing in exactly 2 NBA games. Claimed off waivers by San Antonio for nothing in February of 2023. A move so small at the time, it barely made local headlines. By the end of this season, he'd made 195 three-pointers, a Spurs franchise record, anchored by a 36-point, 11-3 night against the Knicks in December that still stands as the single-game franchise record too. A player who once couldn't stick on an NBA roster becomes a foundational piece of a 62-win team, which tells you almost everything you need to know about how much talent evaluation, patience, and internal development this front office got right in a single calendar year. Off the bench, Keldon Johnson wins 6th Man of the Year, giving this roster a depth advantage almost nobody outside the building had been tracking. The playoffs open, and almost immediately, the pattern from that disaster season repeats itself in miniature. San Antonio handles Portland with no real drama in the first round, closing the series out in 5 games behind a Wembanyama-Fox combination that simply had no answer on the other side of the floor. Then, against Minnesota in round 2, Wembanyama gets ejected on a flagrant foul in Game 4, and instead of the wheels coming off the way they might have a year earlier, Dylan Harper, the rookie nobody was talking about yet, steps into that gap and helps pull San Antonio through the night. A small moment on its own, but it's the first real sign this roster had actually learned something from everything it had already survived, that the depth built through a year of chaos wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was winning real playoff minutes against a real playoff opponent. Then comes Oklahoma City, the defending champions, in the Western Conference Finals. Fox goes down again, a right ankle injury this time, missing the first 2 games entirely with the season on the line. San Antonio somehow splits those 2 without him. In Game 3, he tries to come back, re-aggravates the same ankle on a loose ball dive from Thunder forward Lou Dort, disappears to the locker room, and still checks back in with 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter to get a bucket and an assist right away. Through those first 3 games, he's shooting under 40%, clearly compromised. But by this point in the year, San Antonio doesn't need Fox perfect anymore. They just need him present, while Wembanyama anchors the defense and Champagnie catches fire around him, hitting timely threes in exactly the moments the offense threatens to stall. It comes down to Game 7, on the road, in Oklahoma City. San Antonio comes out shooting 57% in the first quarter and never really lets the lead go, answering every single Thunder run for 4 straight quarters. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander puts up 35 points trying to keep Oklahoma City's season alive, carrying the offense almost single-handedly down the stretch. It isn't enough. Final score, San Antonio 111, Oklahoma City 103. San Antonio first trip to the finals since 2014. This feeling, I can't explain it. Wembanyama says afterward, it's so powerful. Waiting on the other side is a New York Knicks team, chasing its first championship since 1973, in a rematch of the only other finals meeting these two franchises ever had, back in 1999, when San Antonio won it in 5 games for the very first title in team history. This time, the history doesn't repeat the way it should. New York takes the first 2 games by a combined margin of just 11 points, stealing home court right away in 2 games that came down to the final possession. San Antonio answers in Game 3 at Madison Square Garden, snapping New York's 13-game playoff win streak, with Fox, ice cold most of the night, somehow finding the shot that decides it in the final seconds. A night where nothing looked easy for San Antonio's offense until it mattered most. Then Game 4 happens. San Antonio builds a 29-point lead. 29. The kind of lead that, in any other context, ends the conversation about a game before halftime is even over, and watches New York complete the greatest comeback in finals history to steal the game by a single point. A collapse so total it will be replayed and dissected for years, regardless of how the rest of this series turns out. Dylan Harper, the rookie again, scores 21 off the bench in that loss. The one thing San Antonio has to hold on to from a night that will haunt this franchise for years. 2 nights later, San Antonio leads again, by 16 points at one stretch, holding New York to its fewest points in any half all season. Wembanyama blocks 5 shots before the break alone, playing the kind of complete two-way game that had made him the unanimous Defensive Player of the Year just weeks earlier. And New York claws back one final time, closing out the series, 4-1, finishing a run defined as much by San Antonio's own big leads as by anything New York did to force the issue. Here's the number that should worry every team the Spurs face next season. They led at some point in every single one of those 5 finals games. Every one. And they still lost the series. That isn't a team that got outclassed. That's a team that had every single game within reach and still couldn't close the door, which is either the most encouraging or the most maddening stat a young core can carry into an offseason, depending entirely on how they respond to it. Dylan Harper, in the one game San Antonio couldn't save, drops 25 points, his best output of the entire postseason, arriving 1 game too late to matter. And there's a strange symmetry buried in that scoreline. In 1999, it was San Antonio that beat New York 4-1. This time, it's the exact same number, just pointed in the other direction. A quiet, almost eerie bit of franchise history repeating itself with the roles reversed 26 years later. New York gets its first title in 53 years, a moment that will define an entire era of Knicks basketball. San Antonio walks off that floor having just learned the hardest lesson of a season that started with a stroke and a blood clot, and somehow still ended 1 win away from a parade. A season that by any reasonable measure should have been remembered as a disappointment, and instead gets remembered as proof of concept. What happened 1 month later is the real reason this roster still deserves to be called the best in the league. The day San Antonio's season officially ended, Wembanyama became extension eligible, and the Spurs offered him a path toward a supermax deal worth up to $303 million if he hit certain thresholds the following year, the largest contract the franchise had ever been in position to offer a single player. He said no. He signed for 5 years and $252 million instead, deliberately walking away from tens of millions of guaranteed dollars, on purpose, to leave the front office roughly $50 million of extra flexibility they'll need the moment Castle and Harper become extension eligible themselves. It's the kind of decision superstars almost never make, choosing less money now specifically so the front office has room to keep the whole group together later. And it tells you everything about how this particular locker room actually views itself. Spurs family, I'm here to stay, he posted. Whatever it takes. That's the real case for calling this the best starting 5 in basketball. Not the ring, because there isn't one yet. Not the resume, because Oklahoma City still owns the better one. It's that this exact group already survived a coach's stroke, a franchise player's blood clot, a finger surgery, an ankle that never fully healed, and a finals collapse from 29 points up, and came out the other side with its best player choosing to take less money just to keep it whole. Every other contender in this league is trying to build continuity. San Antonio already has it, built the hard way, through every single thing that tried to tear it apart first. Continuity isn't something you can trade for or draft. It's something a group either survives together or doesn't. And this group has already been through more in 16 months than most championship cores go through in a decade. And somewhere in San Antonio right now, there's a very real conversation happening about whether the rookie who kept saving them all season deserves to start over the $229 million All-Star standing right next to him. A conversation that, on its own, tells you exactly how much depth this roster has managed to accumulate in the middle of everything it had to survive to get here.